Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to do our first terrain tutorial in quite a while. Today I'll be building this late Roman / Arthurian country house for a Dux Britanniarum campaign I will be starting soon. But I think a lot of the methods that I'll be using in this video could be used for any Mediterranean terrain up until almost the present era. So sit back, relax, and let's build ourselves a nice Roman house. So the first thing we're going to do for this house is make our clay roof tiles. And so I've graduated to using Hearst Arts molds. And usually you're supposed to pour in dental plaster, but I have a ton of regular plaster around. So all I do is I add a little bit more water than is recommended so that there's not as many imperfections in the plaster. There's not as many bubbles and they fill in really nicely. And once I get a nice pour, I just use a flat object to get a nice flat side, which will help as we're putting together the different roof sections. So I went ahead and glued the roof on. I glued it on upside down, but we'll talk about that later. But for the stucco, the kind of plaster siding of this house, I'm going to use Das clay to simulate the fine texture that comes from stucco siding. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to get a really thin layer of the clay, and I want to make this as thin as I can. I don't want it to be very thick, especially when you're trying to simulate stucco. If you're going for a wattle and daub, you can make it pretty thick and uneven and it will look pretty good. But for this, I want it to be very thin. I only want a hint of texture there. So I smooth it out the best I can with my finger, and then I also run a clay modeling tool across it to get it even smoother and even get little striation effects, which you often see with stucco siding. Just really subtle hints of texture onto the stucco. And then once I get a nice thin even covering, you can even go and make some little imperfections. So I just use the side of my tool here to make little divots. I then run my finger over it so that it's a little more blended into the surrounding clay areas. And then once that clay is dried, I even take some fine sandpaper and go over it so that the texture is only very subtle. If I was making wattle and daub, I wouldn't worry about sanding it. But I do think that sanding it does help simulate a stucco siding a little bit better. So next thing, we got to base coat our country house. So first I'm going to start with the tiles. I just took a dark brown spray paint and I'm going to be spraying all over, getting nice coverage on the tiles here. I like this as a base coat. And then over top of this, I have a Krylon burnt orange color that I'm going to liberally spray on the top of the tiles while the brown paint is still wet, so that the two colors will kind of blend together a little bit better. I got a much better result doing this than waiting until the brown was completely finished drying. And then we're going to paint the side of the walls. I taped up the roof section so that spray paint wouldn't get on them. We're going to start off with a khaki color, kind of a greenish gray, as our primary base color. Then I'm going to come over it with an ivory. Now I'm trying to kind of hit the middle of the wall. I know I'm kind of getting the bottom areas here, but you can remedy that by just spraying the edges with that beige color again. I want to hit the middle of the wall. Whenever I'm making terrain, especially houses, I want your eye to be drawn to highlights in the middle of the terrain. So just taking that beige and spraying it liberally across the middle. And then going back to anywhere that I think need to be touched up and just hitting it with the khaki color. Alright, so now we're going to move on to paint all the wood sections on our MDF terrain here. Again, this is MDF terrain from War Bases. It's kind of their generic line. It's not their Roman-centric line, and they're great because they're pretty modular actually. So here I'm just taking a very dark brown and I'm running it across. It'll take several layers to get good coverage on this door frame. We're going to go for kind of like a cherry, reddish wood here. So I take some burnt sienna, which is a red brown. It's kind of like a brick brown. And I'm going over most of the door frame, only leaving the cracks and only small sections as that dark brown color. And then once I get that burnt sienna down, I'm going to mix a little bit of Naples yellow, golden yellow into the burnt sienna, getting a nice light reddish brown color. And then I'm going to add more and more of that yellow into there, and I'm going to focus more onto the middle of the door to give it a highlight, draw your eye towards the central portions of the wood. And I'm going to be doing this on all the windows and the different parts of the these houses as well. And then finally I mix a little bit of ivory in there and only really touch the central portions of the door, working my way up up to pure ivory, and then just making a little dab right there middle. From a few feet away it'll look pretty good. I forgot to videotape. My final step is I actually take a flesh colored wash, not a brown but a flesh, go over the door, and it helps blend all the different colors together. So now I'm going to highlight my roof a little bit. I have here a nice makeup brush, which makes a nice dry brushing brush here, and I'm taking a bright orange and I'm just lightly running it over the tiles there to help bring out a little bit more contrast in them. And then to kind of make darker areas or shadows, I'm actually taking some of Vallejo's pigment. It's, I believe, the burnt umber color. And I'm just pushing this pigment into random places around the roof to simulate a nice dirty old terrain. Again, this is supposed to be a late antiquity, dark ages time period that I want these buildings to represent. So I want them to look really kind of past their prime and aged. So now to paint the stucco portions, I got my dry brush ready and I took an off-white ivory color and I'm going over all the sections of the wall with that. So first the brush is actually pretty loaded. It's not really a dry brush. I just go over it and then I put my brush back in there and I stipple some of the areas too to just get some more texture on those walls. So it's a nice little mixture of some over brushing, dry brushing, and some stipple work. And then I will go in with a pretty white color. It's Desert Sands by Scale 75, and I'm gonna only focus on the mid sections of the wall, doing a mixture of that over brushing and stippling, focusing on the middle where I want the highlight on the wall to be. And then I'm coming in with some slate gray and I'm just stippling a few areas around the wall just to give a little different color, some more contrast onto the wall to break up some of that ivory color that I put down as my base coat. And then I'm going to take the Streaking Grime Vallejo Weather Effects, which is this kind of greenish wash. Again, since this is going to be for a building in the British Isles, I want it to be kind of dingy and moldy. So I watered this wash down quite a bit because it is a pretty pigment rich. And I'm just doing a nice light coat and it helps draw in all those disparate colors. Seems to blend them a little bit, draws out some of the finer details on the dried clay. It's a really nice color. If I was doing a building that was more centered on the classical era, I might go over it with more of a yellow wash instead of that green. The green really ages it. So to do our final bit of weathering, we're going to be using some more Vallejo pigments here. I'm using the charcoal gray, a very dark gray, and I'm just working it into the corners of each section of the wall. Again, I want to draw your eyes towards the middle of the wall to have nice transition from dark to light going from the outside in. And so I'm just pressing down this pigment, and once I get a fair amount on the model, I will then blow it off so that there'll only be a hint of that dark gray left corners. So here, after I remove the excess pigment, as you can see, it's just a fine gradient. And if it's too stark, you can just wipe some away with your brush. This stuff doesn't set unless you use like a pigment setter or spray it with isopropyl alcohol. So I'm just doing a second layer because I want it even a little bit darker, especially right there at the very edges. And then after I remove the excess, there you see you have a nice transition from dark to light. So now this is a very optional portion of this, but I think it looks good, especially if we're trying to make something really like dingy and weathered. I'm taking some of the rust colored pigment from Vallejo, and I'm hitting all these little divots and things that I had sculpted into the clay with my sculpting tool. And for me, I guess I'm thinking that this is, I don't know, like the brick is kind of rotting away, or in these divots, dirt and what have you has collected in there and has stained the stucco. And then to even really accentuate it more, I take a small brush and I'm gonna bring little streaks down there. Like over the years, streaks of grime have run down the wall. Again, a very optional step, but I think it really does a good job of making these look dingy, older. And with that, we'll be done weathering this building. So one of our final steps for this model is I'm just going to paint all the windows a just standard black, covering all the interior portions. Not worrying too much if I get a little of that black on the inner part of the woodwork there. It's fine. I think painting it black is the easiest way of doing open windows other than trying to get really fancy. And then just to give it a little bit more depth to the color, I add a really dark blue there into the middle of the window. And I think we get a pretty decent effect with it. Now for the last thing that I have to do, since I ended up dropping the model right after I filmed the last portion of the video, I have to cover up this little broken off tile piece. Now, this often happens in terrain building. You'll break something, you'll do something that you didn't intend, but luckily for us, we can just cover it up with here a little bit of clump foliage, and it will again just add to the overall decrepit look of this this house here. And I think in the end it looks fine. That's a good thing about terrain making. Unlike with models, if you break off the arm of a model, well, you're kind of done for. But with terrain, you can always just make it a happy little accident, as our friend Bob Ross would say. And here's the finished model, and this is the first time I had tried a few of the techniques used on this house. I hadn't used DOS clay as stucco before, and I had never used a Hearst Arts mold, which I guess showed because I did put the roof on upside down, and after looking at trying to pry off the top, I just decided I just gotta keep it because I was afraid I would break the model. It's not all that noticeable, but if you get up close to it, yeah, you can definitely tell the tiles are on wrong. So something to watch out for if you're using this this mold kit from Hearst Arts. But again, I think it looks pretty good. I think the weathering and the DOS clay gives a really nice texture to the building, and I definitely think that the molds for the roof tiles are way easier than trying to use corrugated cardboard and cutting them out and gluing them together. It's the cheaper option because you don't have to buy a mold, and I'll link that video down below if you would rather do that. But I'm really happy with how this turned out, and I churned out quite a few of these buildings, which will be used in an upcoming battle report that will be featured on this channel. Anyway, I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you soon with a new video. Take care.